let's explore the experimental evidence that shows nuclear force is short-ranged, attractive, and repulsive. We'll look at several key experiments and observations that demonstrate these properties. First, let's look at scattering experiments. In these experiments, protons are accelerated to high energies and collided with other protons. When protons come within about 1 femtometer of each other, that's 10 to the minus 15 meters, they experience strong nuclear forces. However, as they move further apart, the force rapidly decreases, demonstrating the short-range nature of nuclear force. Next, let's examine nuclear binding energies. The binding energy per nucleon curve shows a peak at mass number 56, which is iron. This peak indicates that nuclear force is most effective at this size. The decrease in binding energy per nucleon after iron shows that nuclear force cannot sustain additional nucleons as effectively, proving its short-range nature. The deuteron provides another piece of evidence. This nucleus consists of 1 proton and 1 neutron held together by the nuclear force. Its binding energy of 2.2 MeV shows the attractive nature of nuclear force. If the force were long-ranged, we would see much higher binding energies in larger nuclei. Finally, let's examine the repulsive core. At distances less than 0.6 femtometers, nucleons experience a strong repulsive force. This is demonstrated in high-energy collision experiments, where particles are ejected due to this repulsion. The nuclear potential shows both attractive and repulsive regions, explaining why nucleons maintain a minimum distance from each other. In conclusion, these experimental observations collectively demonstrate that the nuclear force is short-ranged, attractive at intermediate distances, and repulsive at very short distances. This complex behavior is essential for the stability of atomic nuclei. We'll explore experimental evidence that demonstrates how nuclear force is dependent on spin. Let's look at several key experiments that support this conclusion. First, let's examine nuclear spin observations through scattering experiments. When we scatter neutrons and protons off each other, we observe different interaction strengths depending on whether their spins are parallel or antiparallel. Next, let's look at nuclear magnetic resonance, or NMR. In NMR, we apply a strong magnetic field to align nuclear spins. The nuclei can exist in different energy states based on their spin orientations. When we apply radio frequency radiation, nuclei can transition between these energy levels, giving us information about spin-dependent interactions. 3 nucleon force experiments provide additional evidence. When we study systems of 3 nucleons, we find that their binding energies and scattering properties depend strongly on their spin configurations. Parity violation experiments in beta decay also demonstrate spin dependence. During beta decay, we observe that the direction of electron emission depends on the nuclear spin orientation, violating parity symmetry, and showing that spin plays a crucial role. These experimental observations collectively demonstrate that nuclear force is indeed spin-dependent, fundamentally affecting how nucleons interact with each other. Explore experimental evidence showing that nuclear forces are non-central in character. Let's start by understanding what this means. First, let's understand the difference between central and non-central forces. A central force depends only on the distance between particles like gravity, but non-central forces also depend on other factors like the relative orientation of particle spins. The first piece of evidence comes from nuclear scattering experiments. When nucleons scatter off each other, the pattern of scattered particles varies with angle in a way that can't be explained by central forces alone. Nuclear magnetic resonance experiments provide our second piece of evidence. NMR shows that nuclear energy levels depend not just on position, but also on the relative orientation of nuclear spins. The third piece of evidence involves tensor forces from pion exchange. When nucleons exchange pions, the resulting force depends on the relative orientation of their spins, creating non-central interactions. These experimental observations collectively demonstrate that nuclear forces have a non-central character. They depend not just on distance, but also on spin orientations and other quantum properties of the interacting nucleons.